Okay. What up, Claytriots? It's your boy Clay, streaming at you live from sunny St. Louis, Missouri. It looks pretty nice out, but it is a little bit chilly. Um, since the last time you saw me, I went and did some more canvassing for Corey Bush. Went pretty well. A lot of undecideds on this one. So those are the people that, you have the most influence over, like in terms of like actually making an impact. So, that's always good when you get a lot of undecideds. Um, and then after that, I came back home and me and my wife just had like a big old like gaming and Stargate session. Like it was probably I picked up like McDonald's honestly, and like we just like pigged out and like ate and watched Stargate and yeah, and played video games, and it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Sometimes you just need those like super relaxing, do nothing kind of like it was like 6 hours, like yeah. Um so that was a lot of fun. And then went to bed, woke up. I just made coffee this morning, that was all. And then I uh came up here, clipped some videos from yesterday's stream, and now I am here with you, the viewer, ready to start another educational stream. Yeah, everybody get happy, get glad. We're about to listen to some stuff. So this time I'm not actually going to be showing a video because technically what I'm going to be listening to is a podcast. So there's no actual real video game or real video associated with it, besides just like their background video that they have on the video itself. So but the video that we are going to be listening to, I guess I can pull it up on the browser real quick. Oops, so that's not right. One sec. This one. Okay. So this is the video that we're going to be watching. It's by the Deprogram. If you've heard of them, they're relatively popular. 100K subs, but they do like long form videos on certain topics a lot of the time, but also they just host, like, have people come on their podcast and just talk with them as well. Generally they talk about stuff from an anti-imperialist perspective. I don't know exactly where all of the people who are on this podcast are from, but I think some of them aren't from America, at least. So, getting a little bit of a different perspective there. So this one is going to be about Cuba, pretty relevant considering the blockade we have that's intended to kill as many infants who are on ventilators as possible. It's important to, I guess, learn more about it. But they also their podcasts are like relatively heavily scripted when they do these types of ones where they're talking about a particular issue or subject matter. So I'll be giving some commentary as we go if I hear anything that piques my interest or whatever. I'm not super familiar myself with the entire history of Cuba. All I know is there was the revolution to nationalize, and like create essentially a socialist system of government. And then ever since that day, America has been, sanctioning and trying to destroy them as a people. So, yeah. So anyway, that's what we're going to be listening to. Oh, okay. So now that's showing up. I don't really need this on this one, I think. Let me get okay. Sorry, people. Doing this on the fly here. And I have my chat. Chat needs to go over here. Okay, I think we're good. That's good enough. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. And that's why you guys come here. You're not looking for perfect. You're looking for good enough. Otherwise, you'd go watch somebody else. Yeah, whatever. Sure. Sure, why not? I'll put it up there. Okay, cool. So while we're listening to that, we're going to be playing some Slay the Spire, a different game, not World of Warcraft this time. Slay the Spire, I've got like 400 hours in or something. I don't claim to be very good or anything. It's just a very casual game that I play in my free time. But right now what I'm working on is trying to max out ascension levels. I maxed out the Ironclad. I'm currently working on maxing out the Silent. So that's what I'll be doing. Currently on Ascension 9. Like I said, I'm not very good, so you don't have to complain, okay? I'm just doing this for fun and for something to do while I listen to this educational podcast. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start it. Like I said, I'll be interjecting whenever I feel like there's something interesting that they've said or that I want to commentate on or whatever. So, okay. Here we go.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are again without our favorite Cheeto American man.
Our favorite son. The American son is suffering yet again.
And just so people are aware, this was published 2 days ago, so it's a recent episode.
Foreign lands. While he was back home, he was protected by healthcare, high-quality infrastructure, and a police force that serves the everyday citizen. He decided to step out of this bubble and immediately got infected with 12 venereal diseases, got canceled by 33 aircraft, and what?
The United States. I know that's a joke, but I can't let it slide even as joke form.
Oh, come on. It's supposed to be meta, because I want, yes, there's always at least, I feel like at least one new listener that pops in because he sees our relatively chud name, but in all the best ways. The Deprogram sounds like I'm going to go on a rant about how...
That is funny that their name really does sound like something that like some sort of like alt-right associated red pill sort of thing or whatever. So yeah, they do kind of have that going for their name. I think that's a way to trick them though. You got to trick these people into learning real things or whatever, learning actual anti because they're reactionaries, so they think that they're being counterculture by being far right neo-Nazis or whatever, when they're just leaning into the belief systems that underlie the entire imperialist core of America. So this is how you trick them into actually finding real counterculture ideas, and so maybe that's what they're doing.
Important it is to be your wife, but he comes in, and then their first interaction with our show is always the pre-show banter. And imagine somebody comes in and starts out with this banter that I just dropped.
That's exactly right. Yes, they're gonna be tuned in. Like, wow, we're covering a free Cuba today. I can't wait to visit the brothels of Havana, where the American dollar stretches. These fucking ghouls. Habibi, I was gonna tell you, if you could imagine JT as a snack, an American snack. Well, he is, first of all.
That's what they call me, an American snack.
The American part is a bit dubious because of his curls. That skin color and those curls do not go together. There's some,
there needs to be a counter. There needs to be a counter for how many times you will say
I
that
delegitimize
specific.
The race.
Yeah,
of JT by reversing his curls.
Is he Dominican passing or not? No black, exactly, no black, right, puppy. Yeah. Dominican. Well, JT is no white puppy.
This is the banter portion of the show. I think they get into usually a scripted portion eventually.
Dominican.
Just so people are aware.
Exactly right. I was gonna say, if you would imagine him as an American snack of some kind, what would it be? He would not be a Reese's cup.
Hot dog, because he's both strong and soft, and he can be sweet, but he can be salty, salty. Everything. And the size
raises my blood pressure.
He's consistent. Yeah, he's consistent. Always the same size. That's
Children
what I really like. Usually when you're younger and you want variety in size, but then when you get older with your, penis having partner, you start seeking consistency. And we are at that boomer age where in our partnership we seek consistency, and doesn't matter what insane disease, borderline dying JT is going through. His hot dog is always.
I'm gonna maybe. I think I'm gonna try and skip ahead to the actual the part that I want to hear, which is about Cuba. So
It's not hyper processed garbage. It's actual.
And also, you eat it when you.
I remember, but that might not be an option now. He might be what's it called? He might be the first revolutionary casualty of the righteous Iranian strikes. Inshallah not. But I mean, what am I talking about? The Iranians aren't Israelis. They're not targeting hospitals. But still, let's hope he doesn't get so list. Okay, I create my own fantasies and I place.
Is that the word for it? I didn't. There you go. I'm learning something new today.
No, it's making fun of the Orientalists. Like you.
Okay, well maybe let's see.
With this similar vein of our
Oh, okay, here we go. Sorry, I think this is about where the actual Cuba portion starts. So that's where I'm going to start it.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Deprogram.
What up?
Today, we will be covering Cuba in the similar vein of our monitoring the situation Iran geopolitics episode. This is kind of an unofficial series that's been spawned by the first Chinese episode, or the China episode, which was 2 parts and fantastic, and I highly recommend that you guys listen to it. But I'm enjoying this. Let me know if you guys are.
We might listen to those one day, but they're each like 2 hours long, so it would be two stream sessions for me, because I can't do like I end up adding about like I don't know for an hour long thing. I usually end up adding like 30 to 45 minutes worth of commentary, so it ends up being closer to 2 hours. And so yeah, if I was going to do a 2 hour listen, like that would end up being probably like 3 to 4 hours, and that's too much for me.
are messing with this type of style. But we've gotten a lot of good feedback, and a lot of people have seemed to like the slightly longer, more in-depth geopolitical dive mixed with some theory episodes. So that's why we're doing it. All right. With that being said, though, the current, I guess, overview that we're going to give is specifically Cuba in relation to what's been happening most recently, but we'll kind of give some background as well. The most important thing to know is, as always, these are very quickly evolving situations. There's plenty of things changing hands, new information being reported all the time. So do keep up to date with the stuff that we're referencing in regards to the latest developments. But if in doubt, you can always refer to the American foreign policy white papers that are produced by the Heritage Foundation, or this Brookings Institute, or this or that institute or foundation, whatever. The Burger Freedom
Trust me,
chili
bro.
cheese fries.
We're winning, bro.
Yeah. Also, yeah, if a lot of people don't understand that all of this stuff is basically out in the open at this point, our goals in the region, our goals with Cuba, it's so funny that it can be like straight up out in the open and able to be accessed by anybody, and yet people still like just do not understand a single thing about our policies and why they exist towards Cuba. But yeah.
Trust me, bro. Papers.
Yeah, exactly right. The one that's most interesting regarding Cuba, there's several of them. The Heritage Foundation also has a few of them that are pretty cringe. But the biggest and most, I guess, like overarching one that was made was one titled The Commission for Assistance to a Free Cuba, which is basically a several hundred-page document, if I'm recalling correctly, where they kind of outline how they would manage everything in Cuba, basically post-coup or regime change, including by the regime change points, where they talk about even like, how are the schools going to run? How are we going to shock doctrine the economy into capitalism? Which gusano from Miami are we going to bring in to what's it called? Rule Cuba as a result, so on and so forth. So that's something that you can check out. There's so many of these, but there's only one. But we will.
I mean, I say just throw Marco Rubio in there. he's been an expat for so long. I'm sure that the people of Cuba would not just instantly tar and feather him and like hang him in the public square if they just threw Marco Rubio in down there. That's who I would say they should do.
Get into that later on. That being said, let's give a short historical overview. Now, after the United States intervened in Cuba's War of Independence against Spain, we're talking 1898, the United States, of course,
okay.
when they intervened, this was the Spanish-American War, of course, the United States intervened in Cuba's War of Independence against Spain, but not to liberate Cuba from Spain. They just wanted to replace Spain as the dominant power because it was, quote-unquote, their backyard. And this was formalized in something called the Platt Amendment, which gives the United States the legal right to intervene in Cuban affairs whenever and however they feel.
That's one thing that is hilarious to me, is that we have laws on the books that are like American laws that somehow apply to international bodies and stuff, or like international relations. Like the whole idea of sovereignty is that like your laws are internal to your thing. Like it's the same way like we have like laws for like sanctioning the ICC or invading the Hague if they target any of our American homegrown war criminals or whatever. Like I'm like, I don't necessarily think American law applies when it comes to international relations. I'm just saying, but that is a kind of funny thing to be.
In essence, they forced through decree the forming of a neo-colony in Cuba. And you see this even in the art, the political art and cartoons and stuff like that existed at the era, where they show a very racist depiction of a Cuban, sometimes as a like racist caricature of a Hispanic person or a Latino person, sometimes as a racist depiction of a like sub-Saharan African for some reason, because they've never seen Cubans, I guess, as a mixed and broad population of not just one type of person. So you see them basically being in the classroom of civilization, and Uncle Sam is teaching, and so on and so forth. Regardless, Cuba on paper was formally independent, but they were subordinate in every meaningful sense of the term. By the mid-20th century, this arrangement was enforced.
I assume they mean subordinate to America. So I guess after the Spanish-American War, just to recap, America essentially became the domineering force over Cuba. There's not really any sort of like independence there. And I would say, and that's like the early 1900s.
Through various forms of government that resulted eventually in the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista, who was the culmination, I guess, the shining example of a corrupt military dictator with like a handful of families that are all related to or in direct cooperation with American interests, subsidizing or supporting or maintaining U.S. capital control over the vast majority of Cuban economic life. Basically, he was the example of organized crime and U.S. capital coming together in one person to maintain kind of the semblance of a formally independent, Cuban leader leading Cuba, but for all intents and purposes, it was the United States. The economy of Cuba at the time, and not too differently nowadays, it's more diversified nowadays, but because of their agricultural history, the economy is dominated by sugar production and exports. That's number one. Number two, at the time, specifically, aside from high sugar export domination, it was foreign ownership of basically everything. We're talking businesses, hotels, restaurants, this kind of like service-based stuff, as well as any sort of productive enterprise, things that produce.
Yeah, that is the core goal when we're doing all of these, like for instance, like the Venezuela operations and stuff or whatever. When they say we're going to go take their oil, it's not like we're going in and we're like physically like stealing their oil and then just taking it to then sell ourselves or whatever. When they say we want to take their oil, what they mean is we want our pedobillionaires, our Epstein class, to be able to go in and buy all of these national resources, like the resources of the country, just buy property or stakes in them, and then just be able to skim those profits off and like pocket them. Like that's what they mean when they say they want to steal their oil. Like technically the country still is the one producing the oil, still is the one selling the oil, but you have these, pedo billionaires who come in and they just skim, like they just take the ownership stake in the company and then they just steal all the profits essentially. So that's kind of that's kind of why we do all of these like invasions for resources and stuff. And that's also how we control a lot of these places as well, by essentially having our pedo billionaires have a stranglehold over key sectors of their economy.
And of course, incredible inequality. The land in Cuba was concentrated in something called latifundia, which are huge landed estates, almost feudal in essence, and many of them were owned by U.S. corporations or by local comprador bourgeois that were basically, in essence, the same thing. When it comes to U.S. corporations, the most notorious was United Fruit, the United Fruit Company. The Cuban Revolution happens in 1958 to 59 onwards, and of course this is led by Fidel Castro and his 26th of July movement, which coalesced after many attempts.
Oh, sorry, one sec. I didn't catch the year, so I'm going to go back like half a minute.
Many of them were owned by U.S. corporations or by local comprador bourgeois that were basically, in essence, the same thing. When it comes to U.S. corporations, the most notorious was United Fruit, the United Fruit Company. The Cuban Revolution happens in 1958 to 59 onwards, and of course this is led by Fidel Castro and his 26th of July movement, which coalesced after many attempts at civil engagement, electoral politics, legal challenges, everything. They tried literally everything under the book to try to dislodge that administration or that government, that regime, if you want to use American political language, and nothing worked. So they had to resort to, I believe the Spanish term is luchas armadas, like armed combat. They need to resist militarily, and that's what the 26th of July movement was. And of course, it begins not as a fully articulated socialist project, but more as a broader anti-imperialist national liberation struggle. At the time, because they're still trying to seek good relations with the United States, when asked, they would say, this is not a red revolution, this is an olive green revolution. Now, this is an apocryphal statement. I've never seen a direct source, but I've seen it quoted a lot. So I'm take it with a grain of salt, but it's kind of, that does give you the crux of what they were trying to present themselves as. Much later on, I think in 1961, the Cuban Revolution would explicitly be referred to as a socialist revolution, and the leadership of Cuba would refer to themselves as Marxist-Leninists or communists. Anyways, whenever you actually try to establish real sovereignty in a country, then you'll run into the limits of capitalism. The first major step in this process, in the revolution, after it had ceased power.
By the way, I'm playing this boss terribly. I'm getting destroyed. I really fucked up, I think. I might just start over. I'll hopefully do a little bit better this time. But just so people are aware.
Power was agrarian reform laws. This was 59 and 1963. Now, these laws broke up large estates, these latifundia, and they redistributed land to peasants, which are, for the vast majority of the time, and for significant masses of land, landless. It redistributed this land to these peasants, and it converted major holdings into state farms, meaning farms owned by the state. Now, this move was targeting U.S. land, or owned land. Excuse me, there's no U.S. land in Cuba, U.S. owned land, but that's because the U.S. has forcibly bought up land or stolen or occupied or seized land in Cuba. Companies like United Fruit lost massive holdings, and of course, despite Cuba offering compensation to them in return for seizing this land, the compensation was based on the tax values these corporations themselves declared to the Cuban government. But these values, because of course the Cuban government prior to the revolution was basically a new colony, who did not care what the Americans could have told them, this land that produces tens of millions of dollars every month in revenue is worth $2 tax-wise, and they wouldn't care. And that's kind of what happened, actually. The values, these tax values that were declared by these American corporations were artificially low because they want to avoid taxation. So when Cuba used those numbers...
Clever. That's a good point. Yeah, if you're saying these companies, they're only worth like $10,000 or something, based on their tax percentage or whatever that they were paying for them. Yeah, okay, here's your $10,000. Now scram. Like we're compensating you fully for the valuation that you told us. That's a very clever way of of basically getting all, like, legally, finding a legal reason to get that for free, or like a justifiable reason that you could say or whatever.
The companies, of course, rejected the compensation outright because it wasn't "quote unquote" fair or enough. So they changed into this narrative that this was theft, and that is selective narrative delivery, if if there is anything of the kind. Then eventually,
Cuba wasn't the one who valuated them. You guys were the ones who valuated them on your taxes. So I would say that's perfectly legal. That you shouldn't have tried to. If you hadn't valued it so low, then you would have gotten a much larger amount whenever they, bought you out essentially, or forced, did eminent domain essentially, and just bought your company, forced you to sell your company to them.
The decisive break comes, and that's in 1960. Cuba nationalized oil refineries. Many were owned by the United States or U.S. firms, and the reason that they nationalized them is because the Soviet Union would send oil, or through trade, Cuba would get oil from the Soviet Union, and that oil would need to be refined on Cuba, on Cuban land. But these refineries would not do it. They would refuse because they're American owned. So after back and forth and discussions of payments and other setups and schemes that would make it work, eventually there was no headway was being made. So the Cuban government nationalized oil refineries, and along with it, banks and utilities and sugar mills and a bunch of other stuff. Now, this is framed very often as an ideological move. Of course, there's an element of that, but it's also a response to direct U.S. aggression. The United States was applying economic pressure to Cuba already at the time, cutting off trade, trying to destabilize the new government in many ways. There's that famous CIA dossier that basically talks about how the point of the blockade and sanctions that were placed on Cuba, which eventually would be placed and not very far off from where we're talking, we're still in the early 60s. The blockade was specifically intended to maximize the misery of the Cuban population so as to force a shift or change in government. That is the
Yep, it is all out there. We can all go read it. Journalists and news reporters can also all go read it. So when they uncritically state that, no, that's not actually the reason that we're doing it, you can just say it's out there. It's in the white papers. Like, we have reports of like exactly what we were trying to do to them. So, and that it just goes to show how, obviously, I mean, anyone who watches my channel understands, but how biased inherently our news media is.
The express purpose of it. They're not trying to punish any, that they're trying to punish the entire, collective punishment of Cuba and the Cuban people, because they had the gall, the audacity to make a decision for themselves and for the nation. Regardless, nationalization was at the time, and of course would continue to be, a defensive move, and the first step in that transition to a socialist mode of production. And then by 1961, the revolution was explicitly declared as socialist. Now, of course, this socialism was being built under siege, and we'll go into that plentifully. Geopolitically, of course, this was a very large rupture with the United States. With this change, you could say that Cuba becomes the first socialist state in the Western Hemisphere, and a direct challenge to U.S. dominance in the region, and of course an example for other economies and countries in Latin America. Now, of course, Cuba was cut off from U.S. markets, so Cuba instead was encouraged by material conditions to integrate into the Soviet-led system via something called the Council of Mutual Economic Assistance, the Comecon. This arrangement is straightforward, I would say. Cuba would export sugar to the United States, to the Soviet Union. Soviet Union would provide oil, machinery, industrial goods, and a bunch of other trade would kind of go in kind like this. Sugar is great, but the USSR was doing this more for friendship, because the USSR itself was a huge sugar producer. It did not need sugar.
Yeah, the USSR did a lot to, like, one of the best things that it did was help a lot of like lower and middle countries in their revolutionary struggles, like in terms of like fighting against imperialism or whatever. That stems more from the like the USSR had a universal vision for socialism and communism or whatever, to apply to, like, they wanted it to be international. It's a very idealistic vision that I don't necessarily know. Like, I mean, it is, I guess it is possible, but it's like, I think that it kind of has to grow a little bit more naturally in the rest of the world before, like, I feel like it might have been just a little bit ahead of its time, if I had to say. But some of the great things that they did, though, was helping out all of these lower and middle powers as they broke the yoke of imperialism off of them. And also, it's why now that the USSR is gone, these countries are emiserated, like getting emiserated at like a level unforeseen, like or unseen before that time period.
Sugar in this way. So this was more of an agreement of friendship that stabilized the economy of Cuba and gave it kind of a lifeline for many decades. A vital lifeline in the sense that the Cuban economy, had it been able to trade with the rest of the world, would not have needed this lifeline, but they were not allowed to. Cuba was not just chilling on its own and developing socialism on their own. They also pursued a genuine policy of internationalism. This includes military and medical support abroad. Medical support, it's all over the world. There's hundreds of thousands of Cuban doctors that have been sent around the world that have treated genuinely millions and tens of millions of patients for free. And this is a form of medical internationalism that's unparalleled. And this is a country of just a few million people and fairly...
Yeah, Cuba's doctors are known for being some of the best in the world. And like he's saying, they go everywhere. They go to war zones. They go to like heavily impoverished countries. It's a form of both international solidarity, but also it is I think in a sense a form of what's it called, like soft power sort of initiatives as well, like showing people like diplomatic soft power initiatives to be like, hey, look at what we can offer. If you guys need help, we'll send our doctors. If you have some major earthquake or something, we'll send our doctors. They can help you guys out. And they are well regarded for being some of the best in the world.
Poor because of the severe economic deprivation forced on it by the economic blockade. The United States has never done anything of the like, and it's the richest country on earth. It's sad.
Well, our doctors probably aren't as good as theirs, to be honest. Their doctors, like I said, are some of the best in the world. Our doctors are, I mean, like, I'm not going to say we don't have good doctors, because we do, but I don't think, I don't know. We have like all of the, I guess, maybe technology and money behind it, like to be able to achieve good medical outcomes, where their doctors, I would say, are probably more talented in general. But yeah.
To reflect on the point. But anyways, that's medical. On the military side, Cuba was involved in Angola, where Cuban forces supported the MPLA against the apartheid-backed and U.S.-aligned forces of racism, much as they're currently, by the way, allying with the forces of racism in Israel. And the reason the Cubans were doing this was because they felt a material obligation to this global anti-imperialist struggle. They did not get anything out of this. There's no payment. They did this out of the goodness of their hearts, both as an ideology.
Well, and also, I think, as a diplomatic move. I do think, like, I don't necessarily disagree that it is out of the goodness of their heart, but I do think that it adds, like, there is a diplomatic angle to this, where people will then be more willing to try to go against, like, America's, insane interest of starving their people. Like, that's kind of how I see it as twofold.
Logical, and also as a form of solidarity with these colonial, anti-colonial movements. Now, of course, from the American perspective, this is completely unacceptable. So you get a sustained campaign of destabilization. Of these. We have the Bay of Pigs, where the CIA sent Cuban exiles into Cuba to try to invade it and then provoke an American invasion afterwards, but it was defeated in just 3 days.
Whatever happened, does anybody remember, recently there was a group of Cuban nationals Cuban expats from America who, like, got on a boat from Florida with a bunch of guns and, like, weapons and stuff, and were planning on trying to start, like, some revolution in Cuba, and they got, like, didn't they, like, a lot of them get killed and a bunch of them get captured? Whatever happened to those people? Are they still being held in Cuba? I feel like we never hear about them anymore.
Is Operation Mongoose, where there's economic warfare, sabotage, the hundreds of assassination attempts against Castro, all of which failed, alhamdulillah. There's just so much of this stuff. We've done a dedicated episode, one of our bonus episodes actually, about Fidel Castro, which I highly recommend you listen to. I think it's number 26 or something like that, but you have to check that out. It is very, very good. I highly recommend it. We go into all the silliest attempts at assassinating Castro. We also have a secondary one where we go through all the insane ways that they try to destabilize Cuba. But this is basically a systematic attempt by the United States, the most powerful nation on earth, to reverse the revolution of the Cuban people. And finally, in 1991, you have the beginning of many hardships for Cuba because of the illegal dissolution of the Soviet Union, illegal and undemocratic dissolution of the Soviet Union. As a result of this, Cuba loses its primary trading partner overnight, including its energy supply and its external economic support, and it's left just in this island of blockade. And as a result of this, there's something called a special period of severe economic crisis, where there's fuel shortages, scarcities, collapsing industrial output, living standards drop, and so on and so forth. But Cuba adapts very intelligently and creatively, and in response to this threat, they are forced by circumstance to introduce certain market reforms. This includes legalization of some small private businesses, opening to certain foreign investments, particularly for tourism, and the dollarization of certain parts of the economy, particularly tourism economy. Now, a lot of people will be like, oh my gosh, capitalism has been restored in Cuba. No, this is more like a new economic policy, and also they're under siege. It's fully understandable why they would have to do this. But the goal, of course, is to preserve the socialist state and to maintain the core achievements of the revolution, healthcare, education, so on and so forth. But that also requires re-engaging with this hostile global market on some sort of limited terms. Cuba has survived in a system which has been systematically designed to exclude it at all ends, and it is like a stone's throw away from the shores of the most
Yeah, it's a miracle. Like, honestly, it's a miracle that Cuba has even lasted this long. America will stop at nothing to ensure that that there is no example of a better world out there, right? Like, they will. They honestly, like, they will do everything in their power to show that there is no vision for a better world, that nothing better can happen, that this is the best you're going to get, is our capitalist, pedo billionaires taking all the excess profits of your labor, right? Like, that's what they want to show the world, is that there's nothing better than that. This is the best you're going to get. So anything that even remotely shows a counter to that, like Cuba, where they have, one of the best healthcare industries in the world, while being completely eviscerated by the sanctions and all of that stuff, really, really shows like how strong and resistant the Cuban people are, that they were able to, maintain that and create something as good as their public healthcare system. So, and like he's saying, so close to the imperial core. It's crazy. But yeah, America will destroy everything good in the world to show people that nothing good is possible. They're gonna do it as well with like if you, I assume at some point they're gonna do it for all of those Nordic countries, right? The Nordic countries that we all look at as like, oh man, those social democracies are so great. Like, if only we had something like that here. That had been the narrative for a while for a lot of progressives. They'll go after them too. They'll start trying to destroy them, because the goal is to make sure everyone in the world understands that there is no possibility of a better future. And it's up to all of us to do our best to counter message against that. We need to have a vision for a better future, because the one that we currently live under, with America at the top, and like we can do better, people. We can do better.
Reactionary and evil state to ever exist. So that kind of brings us to today. The Cuban people have, through decades and through hundreds of thousands of millions of lives, fought to sustain their revolution, their dedication to internationalism, medical and otherwise, and to survive underneath this horrible blockade by the United States. And that's something that we should always celebrate them for. And that's why Cuba is so close to the hearts of anybody who has a soul.
It's one of those like, I know that nothing exists outside of the confines of ideology, blah, 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 subjectivism, blah, blah, blah. But It's kind of the ultimate litmus test, in my opinion, because
Yeah.
I cannot even imagine the kind of life you would have had to go through that would justify you not supporting the Cuban cause. Like, it's kind of one of the easiest and most black and white global scenarios that you can pick from. Like,
yeah, even if you don't like socialism, just from a sovereignty perspective, like of being able to create a system of government in your own country and not getting fucked with by America, like, yeah. And the people who hate it obviously are the American expats, or like, you know, I guess you would say Cuban expats living in America. Basically any expats living in America are some of the worst, most reactionary among us. Like they hate their homelands with a burning passion. Every single fucking one of them, dude.
Yeah.
almost cartoonishly good guys, like, and especially because the other side is not almost but very cartoonishly evil. Run. If you're on a date and he doesn't like Fidel Castro, run is what I'm telling you.
Yeah, exactly right. It's always gonna be the same. They took my ponies and my what's it called, our mansions and slaves and the ponies.
Then run harder. Yeah. Then pick up the fork and proceed to
jam it directly into their carotid. Anyways, I'm gonna give a very short history of direct U.S. aggression against Cuba in its various forms, particularly sanctions. I'll start with something that I found very interesting while doing research for this, because it's always interesting to, like, sometimes we just kind of need to freshen up our knowledge about the stuff, and I always come up, or I always find new things that I didn't know before, and it's always more like barbaric and horrible and evil, just like cartoonishly evil, right? One of the which that I found was interesting is forms of biological aggression and sabotage that the American government has tried to carry out in Cuba, and the first one that we know of is the introduction of something called African swine fever, and this happened in the early 70s. And this was at a time when Cuba was trying to increase its output of meat and increase the consumption of meat, particularly pork, which is important to Cuban cuisine, which is very cringe, I know, but what can you do? But yeah, so the African swine fever was artificially introduced into the island, and this resulted in the slaughter of 500,000 pigs that could not be eaten as a result, or used for whatever purposes, for food purposes. There's another instance of this, of dengue fever being introduced on the island, and this was in the 80s.
Dude, that's like what? They introduced a virus, like a foreign virus into their populace to just fucking like kill as many of them as possible. How is that not like the biggest war crime? Like, right? How many introducing a virus like to a people to try and kill as many of them as possible should be a genocidal act, right? They should be in The Hague forever. That is crazy.
Which affected hundreds of thousands of people on Cuba, so on. So there's several of these instances that like this did not happen in any of the islands nearby. It's just it affects Cuba, and there's the Cuban government outlines different ways that they were introduced, and of course the American government just, oh no, my gosh, these crazy people, why would we ever do something like this? The same people that played with the idea of using biological warfare on California, on the coast of California, and then blaming it on the Cubans or something like that. I remember they were also playing around with, would never do things like this. Anyways, there's examples like this. There's examples of commercial, for example, sabotage or interference. For example, you had certain terrorists, CIA-linked Gusana terrorists that bombed the Cubana flight 455 that killed the 73 people on board. This happened in 1976. And the perpetrators, the persons who carried out the crime, lived openly in Miami for decades, and the United States protected them. Nothing happened. Mass murders. You have examples of radio and TV.
Oh, we protect terrible people all the time. And also like Israel too. Like if you want to do a terrible atrocity, and as long as it's aligned with America's interests, you will have free reign to do that, and they will protect your ass. Like yeah, you're not going to go to the ICC. You're not going to, there's plenty of like war criminals and stuff that like we host and we protect over here in America. I can't really think of any off the top of my head right now, but I know that there's been at least a couple
forms of attempted sabotage, like Radio and TV Marti, which was established in the 80s, and these are American-funded stations that broadcast anti-communist propaganda into Cuba, basically around the clock. And this is a violation of international broadcasting regulations and so on and so forth. This is internationally illegal, but nobody cares because the United States is doing it. And it's in the same vein of the Radio Free Europe garbage. By the way, funnily enough, this, like almost every other dumbass, Gusano outlet, basically collapsed overnight when Trump was like, we're not gonna carry out U.S. aid anymore. And then they put out a statement, them and the Miami Herald and a bunch of other of these Gusano sources immediately like, oh, we've lost overnight 96% of our funding. Please support us. I'm like, oh, I wonder where that 96% came from. You fucking ghouls. But anyways, you have these USAID and NED programs, the National Endowment for Democracy, where millions of dollars annually are funneled into quote-unquote democracy promotion programs, which are these front operations for funding any sort of anti-government activist, quote-unquote independent journalists. This is all intended to make a fifth column inside the country. They even tried to introduce like some sort of Twitter clone a bunch of years ago that failed catastrophically, alhamdulillah, but they never stopped trying. And by the way, if you doubt this, as early as like 2018, 2019, you could get grants from the U.S. government of up to $300,000 to do quote-unquote pro-democracy work in Cuba. It's hilarious. And by the way, when they say like pro-democracy, they specifically mean the reinstitution of markets and the
slush funds that go on inside of these like right-wing think tanks, like, is also wild. It's basically free money. If you are down on your luck and you need some free money, go find a right-wing think tank, and you can, I'm sure, find some, or become a reactionary YouTuber, and I'm sure that you will they will find you in that case.
Moving the current government illegally, of course, so on and so forth. So it's how democratic could you be? This is what's more important is the sanctions. Before I give you the basis of the sanctions, I want to give you prices generally, or general historic cost, let's say. At current, dollar value amounts, the blockade has cost Cuba over $170 billion. Cuba is a country of a fairly small population, just a few million people, right? $170 billion over several decades is a ridiculous amount of investment. If you adjust it for the depreciation of the dollar against gold, part after the 70s, blah, blah, then the Cuban government would have lost around $1.5 trillion since the blockade has been instituted. That is, again, a ridiculous amount of money. Let's break it down even further. When you factor in annual losses, let's say it's like from one calendar year, like beginning of one calendar year to the beginning of the next calendar year, the blockade costs around or nearly $8 billion in damages to Cuba. And the latest total loss amount is 50% higher than it was in previous years. And this is because of new levels of tightened sanctions that the United States government has imposed. On the day-to-day, the blockade costs Cuba millions. In just 4 months, the blockade results in a loss of $2.9 billion, which would finance the purchasing of buses necessary for public transport in the entire country, which is something that they need to renovate. 2 months, so we're going down in time. We said 4 months. 2 months would be the cost of fuel for the entire country's electricity demand for a year. 16 days is the equivalent to cover the key needs of the entire country's basic medications. So their entire healthcare system. 5 days is equivalent to financing the very necessary to repair thermonuclear plants that Cuba has for generating electricity. Just 14 hours is equivalent to the cost of purchasing the insulin required to cover the needs of all diabetics in the country. 14 hours, right? And 10 minutes is equivalent to funding or covering the funds for all hearing aids for children and young people with disabilities in special education. The reason I'm giving these examples, and this is also mentioned by the Cuban government as examples, the reason I'm giving these is because it makes it more personal. When you hear, oh my gosh, they lost out on this many $1 billion worth, you're like, okay, that's a large amount of money. How does that translate? And then when you realize like in a year, it covers all the public transport needs and all the medical needs and all the insulin and all the hearing aids, like all this stuff, and what's called refurbishing and renewing all the electricity grids and power plants, you really realize the evil that the United States is for carrying out these horrible sanctions. The first sanction was one called Trading with the Enemy Act, which was instituted in 1962. And this was the original legal basis for sanctioning Cuba. And Kennedy used this to basically ban all trade with Cuba because it considered the island a wartime enemy, despite the fact that it was not a wartime enemy and there was no declaration of war by Congress, blah, 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 all this bullshit that doesn't matter. But there's a lot of legal work in the background that technically would render this illegal, but it doesn't matter because so much bullshit has been built upon this like rotten bedrock that is just thoroughly buried. And there's no way you can get to this because subsequently in 1963 there's the Cuban Assets Control Regulation, which froze all Cuban assets in the United States and prohibited any financial transactions that involved quote-unquote Cuban interest, which could be basically whatever they decide. There's the Torricelli Act in 1992, which prohibited foreign subsidiaries of U.S. companies from trading with Cuba, and it also banned any ship that docked in Cuba.
Yeah, and this is just like, it's also like, I feel like they go, like, even with the, sorry, I'm stuttering a lot here. Even in regard to, like, capitalism, right? Like, as like, they want to make sure that there are no examples that are counter to the ideas of like global capitalism, basically, right? This still seems like an absurd, like autistic level hyperfixation on this one country that is like crazy to me. That like so many different people over the course of decades constantly just being like, we hate this country, like we want to destroy this country, like, and I'm just like, can you not find like another country, like another socialist country or something that you can like fuck with for a little bit? Why are you so hyper? And I think it's probably because it's just so close to us and so easy. Like, so we feel, the global capitalists feel like we need to go after this one because it's so close to us. And also it's easier to go after because it's so close to us. But yeah, I don't know. It does feel like almost like an autistic level hyperfixation on fucking with Cuba that our, pedo billionaires have.
From entering a U.S. port for 180 days. So this basically formally made it that you'd either trade with Cuba or you trade the United States. No port visit happens less than twice a year, right? You can't say like, oh, well, in the beginning of the year, we're going to land in Cuba. And then like in July, we're going to go to the United States. That's not how it works. These go weeks in and weeks out. All right, so basically that's barring anybody from trading with Cuba. Then came the Helms-Burton Act in 96, which codified the blockade into law, meaning that the president cannot lift it without congressional approval, just to make sure that the stuff is permanent, essentially. And it allows U.S. citizens to also sue foreign companies for quote-unquote trafficking in nationalized property after 1959. It is meant to paralyze foreign investment. An example of this would be, let's say, a Spanish hotel chain operates on land that was once a U.S.-owned plantation that had slaves and all the rest of it. They can be sued in Miami for trying to invest. The Spanish hotel chain, for trying to invest in Cuba, will be sued. And this creates this legal minefield that scares away any sort of capital from Cuba. Now, then you had the state sponsor of terrorism. They were put on this list in 1982, and then it was renewed in 2021 by the Trump administration. And this
what terrorism has Cuba ever like engaged in? Like, seriously, what terrorism? I can't even think of a single incident and I don't even like the word terrorism that much, as people know, but like, I can't even think of anything that could even loosely be defined as terrorism that Cuba has engaged in.
Triggers this extreme financial quote-unquote over-compliance with any sort of transactions that enter Cuba. And this means that international banks will refuse to process any Cuban payments because they're afraid of many large U.S. fines, millions or even more in dollar terms. And this results in, for example, Cuba being unable to purchase any specialized medical equipment or medicines, for example, pediatric heart stents or cancer drugs, if they contain more than 10% of U.S. patented components as well, which is fucked up. That means basically anything that's ever touched the United States in development phases, basically, means that they cannot be moved into Cuba or imported by Cuba. Of course, in financial sectors, we know it's the same thing with Iran. The United States dominates the global SWIFT system, so Cuba is basically barred from international banking, making it impossible to pay for imports or receive credit. So even if a company in, let's say, Europe wants to sell food to Cuba, which is technically allowed and under some exemptions, most banks will refuse to process that payment because they're afraid of being barred from U.S. financial systems through SWIFT or being hit by millions of dollars worth of fines. And this basically means that Cuba is completely severed from the global SWIFT banking network. At the same time, the blockade forces Cuba.
Hey, at least the global SWIFT banking network is starting to go the way of the dodo bird. I mean, it's a slow process, right? America still dominates the global banking. However, all of these sanctions regimes that we've been doing, especially those with Russia, have significantly accelerated the move away from the dollar and SWIFT or whatever. Lots of countries are starting to settle, payments in their own local currencies and stuff. And lots of them are also starting to use the yuan instead. So this whole system that we have set up that allows us to eviscerate the Cuban people so easily, it's going to be harder to do in the future because there will be also crypto as well. I'm not a big fan of crypto, but I will acknowledge that it is beneficial for, black market dealings and stuff when it comes to the sanctions and shit that we the violent sanctions we impose on other people. It does come as a lifeline for that because it's not tracked in the normal ways and stuff. So
but to buy food from distant markets at higher shipping costs because they can't use standard credit that's available to any other countries. And then afterwards, we arrive at the latest, which is Executive Order 14380. And this is the one that Trump signed on January 29, 2026, which is the most aggressive form of this economic warfare. It invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and something called the National Emergencies Act, which means that policies, practices, and actions of the Cuban government constitute an unusual and extraordinary threat to U.S. national security, which is complete
absolutely.
Nonsense. Everybody knows this is fucking nonsense.
They're gonna lift the whole island and drop it on New York.
I wish. But yeah. And of course, through tariffs, they apply secondary sanctions where this executive order allows the United States to impose additional tariffs on any goods imported into the United States from countries that provide oil to Cuba. This means that this indirect clause in it.
More sanctions shit, dude. Every single time we do this, there is a response. It's another it's just another chink in the armor of it's time to we need to start accelerating getting off the dollar. If America is gonna molest the money this much, people have to. I think especially if we're going to see some sort of crash related to AI and stuff, and we bring down the entire global financial system again, like 2008. I think that all of these things are leading to people being we gotta accelerate our transition away from the dollar status. So like I said, every terrible thing that we do has a counter reaction. There's nothing exists in a vacuum. There is always a silver lining to all of these things that we do, even if it is a long-term slow march towards progress at the same time as our immediate violent retributions that we're enacting. So it might not feel that way, but there is, it does always have a counter reaction that we should take note of.
Means, for example, if a country sells oil to an intermediary with the quote-unquote knowledge, which can be, by the way, inferred, the knowledge that it might reach Cuba at some point, that country will then, or can be, then hit with U.S. trade penalties and tariffs as a result.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm trying to explain
Absolutely.
here?
And they will as well.
And that makes it, and that's another one of those, is to make people think twice or thrice and 100 times before considering Cuba as a trade partner for anything, even small things. Now, when we bring up the 10% rule for things that have patents, this was the same thing applied to Vietnam at the time and a bunch of other countries. But I'm just going to list a few things that have 10% patents. We have CT scanners, MRIs, ultrasound machines from all the major brands. We're talking GE and Philips and Siemens and so on and so forth. So they can't import those. You have reagents for lab tech, so laboratory chemicals for diagnosing, let's say, HIV or hepatitis, or even certain like very common blood tests. The reagents are only or very rarely not exclusive, but by vast majority produced by U.S. subsidiaries, so they can't get those. At the current rate, Cuba produces 60% of its own basic medicines, which is fantastic. But the blockade has specific interventions that prevent Cuba from importing active pharmaceutical ingredients, which is basically the precursors to making medications, and even the filters, the specialized filters and vials that you need to produce medication. Like this is this is spiritually Israeli. Does that make sense?
It is.
Right? Like
I mean, they learn from someone.
Spiritually Israeli. Well, okay, but Israeli is spiritually American. So in the end, it's like a big Ouroboros of like, we're out, like it's like we're two kids on the play yard trying to out evil each other is what it feels like to me.
Yeah, like how like depraved of an approach to try to limit somebody from. It's like, oh yeah, well, we will dig up all your wells, we'll dump concrete into them, and you're not allowed to get water from any of the creeks or whatever, like, and you're not allowed to pump groundwater, and you can't collect the rainwater. So you just need to go fuck yourself. That's how you can get water.
That's why I call it black and white. I mean, it's genuinely, it doesn't need any in-depth analysis whatsoever. It's like crazy evil prince living on top of a hill and laughing maniacally as he rolls down a AIDS infested rock down on the tiny village of 12. It's
Exactly.
What are you? What are you? What?
After
An AIDS infested rock. I'm pretty sure that AIDS is not transferable through rock, as far as I'm aware. But that's a pretty good one.
After it harasses and violates all the children.
Yeah. While shitting and pissing and coming at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
Fucking
Such a way with words.
lasers coming out of its eyes. It's screaming. Okay, I was gonna say screaming I love Israel, but that's gonna come out very badly. Well, screaming slurs. Yes.
Look, one thing that's very interesting about this blockade is every single year since 1992, so we're talking over 30 years, the United Nations General Assembly has voted on resolutions to end
that's
the
a
blockade.
great Freudian slip.
The United States and vote? Oh, please. Anyways, the United Nations General Assembly votes on this resolution to end the blockade, and it is 190 nations. We're talking over 90% of the world, the vast majority of it, that votes to end the blockade every single year. Now, a few years of U.S. abstentions, and these are usually EU, NATO aligned states, Poland, Romania, Czech, stuff like that. And they cite, quote unquote, Cuba's diplomatic ties with Russia as the pretext for their abstention. The no's are always the Zionist imperialist axis. It's the United States and Israel. It has always been exclusively the United States and Israel.
Probably Argentina as well now. Javier Milei's Argentina has joined the axis of Epstein. Okay, everybody. So he's probably in there voting for it too.
Most recent one that was this year, I believe, if not last year. The no's were joined by such a colorful company as Milei's Argentina, Hungary, Paraguay, North Macedonia, and Ukraine.
How could I tell? How did I guess?
Ukraine, I understand. Paraguay has always been a U.S. cuck state. Hungary, I understand. Argentina under Milei, I understand. Why North Macedonia?
Oh, God. I'm so sorry. I'm not even Macedonian. They're usually the good guys. Like, they're half Albanian, I think.
So this is also one of those things where, like, the UN was always doomed to fail with its inception. And it's unfortunate because there was no way to create, because, okay, the UN in the aftermath of the World War II was supposed to be some sort of international body to, facilitate like conflict resolutions without and trying to prevent the worst parts of World War II, like the carpet bombings and blatant civilian, infrastructure, like, and killing civilians and all that sort of stuff, like trying to prevent all that from happening, right? But because it was created with a unilateral veto for specific countries, like the United States, China, Russia, I can't remember who else, but like there was, I think maybe, no, I don't know. I can't remember who all got the unilateral veto, but because that was baked into it, it could never fulfill its obligation. And that was intentional, because America wouldn't sign on to the UN without being given a unilateral veto. And then obviously the other countries, like the other major powers like China and Russia, were also like, okay, well then we get one too. But if we didn't have it with a unilateral veto, and the UN with an actual, military capability, like the UN Security Council, was able to just straight up hold votes on issues and then enact them, like with an actual army or whatever, if necessary, then I think that we would have a much better, less awful world. And maybe the next time after, World War III, when we have to rebuild these institutions, like maybe we can get some semblance of like an actual equitable system, but it will only happen if America just gets downgraded from superpower to like middle power, I think, because I do think that China and Russia are less imperialist generally than America. China for sure. Russia is like 50-50. Like they are less imperialist, obviously, because America is like a million times more imperialist than every other country on the planet. However, and that's basically also just because of their capabilities, but I think that I think that Russia has some imperial ambitions, but not the capabilities that America has. But anyway, if we create a new system, though, it has to be, there cannot be any of these like unilateral vetoes. That really fucked up the entire thing.
Half Albanian. That explains it.
That's the problem. Albania does not vote no, or even abstain. Albania
I was
didn't
just
abstain.
trying to do casual racism, but not.
It's okay. It's okay. I understand. You couldn't help it. It was in your blood, in your Chetnik blood.
Oh, okay. Then don't make me dangle a curd in front of you, man.
Oh, I regret that. I immediately got a coughing fit. Okay. Habib, I love you. Okay. The blockade currently is maintained. The reason that they maintain this, the economic blockade on Cuba is...
Wait, now I'm too interested. Wait, why did North Macedonia vote for, how was it called?
Resolution to end the blockade on Cuba. Economic blockade on Cuba.
Vote against resolution to end blockade on Cuba. North Macedonia, US, and 5 other countries voted at the UN to continue sanctioning Cuba. Okay, Macedonia, why? Why Macedonia? No answer whatsoever. Nobody cared enough to make a fucking article about it. Yeah. No, nothing. I guess long-lasting Macedono-Cuban beef or something. I don't know.
It's probably just like U.S. aligned garbage, as always.
Probably.
But anyways, the reason they maintain the blockade is because a successful and prosperous socialist Cuba would be a dangerous example for the rest of the continent. So if you have a small island under a total siege and it can still provide free healthcare and education, which the United States cannot provide, what could this social society achieve without one? So the blockade is intended to ensure that the Cuban model is always associated with scarcity rather than its massive and incredible achievements in human development, and serves kind of as a warning to any other country in the quote-unquote backyard of the United States that dares to challenge the hegemony of capital, particularly U.S. capital. Now, Hugo finally will break my, gapping session off by telling you about this Trumpian executive order and how Cuba is coping with it in its various ways. Please take it away, Habibi.
Exactly. Thank you very much. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just a continuation of what was done before, an attempt to turn the long-running embargo into a complete fuel blockade. On the 29th of January 2026, Trump signed the executive order declaring a national emergency regarding Cuba and giving Washington the power to slap extra tariffs on goods from
Our national emergency. What the fuck is even a national emergency at this point? It's literally anything they want is a national emergency, it feels like, because what the fuck was Cuba doing that was a national emergency to the Americans, to America? Was like showing people that you can still have doctors even under crippling siege. Like I don't understand how that is a national emergency to us.
any country that sells or delivers oil to the island directly or indirectly. It builds on the same legal toolkit used for Iran and Venezuela, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, weaponizing access to the U.S. market to scare third countries away from trading with Havana at all. You don't have to physically blockade Cuban ports if you can threaten Mexico, Russia, Algeria, or anyone else with tariffs on everything they export to the U.S. simply for refueling Cuba. In practice, this has already pushed some suppliers and airlines to pull back. Canadian and Russian carriers have suspended flights, citing jet fuel shortages on the island, and oil exports to Cuba have dropped sharply in the last few months. UN human rights experts have not minced words either, describing the order as a fuel blockade that violates international law and threatens basic social and economic rights on the island.
International law is dead, dude. We let it die. We let it die in Gaza. It's gone. I'm sorry, people. It's gone. We let it die. That's, we tried. People like me were out there. We tried to keep it. We tried to preserve it. But unfortunately, there wasn't enough people. There wasn't enough... There weren't enough liberals, independents, and conservatives out there trying to keep it alive. I mean, conservatives were probably happy that it's dead. But, there weren't enough people out there protesting on day one of the genocide on Gaza. So, we all collectively let it die. It's on all of us, but it's on some of us more than others.
Even in Washington, some voices have condemned the measure as collective punishment, pointing in particular to the impact on hospitals and other critical infrastructure when the grid fails. The most immediate effect has been a deepening energy crisis. Cuba was already in a bad shape after years of the U.S. embargo, as you've learned from Hakeem. This new order has now turned a crisis into something closer to a medieval siege. You see it first in blackouts. Large parts of the country have experienced prolonged power cuts, with the national grid collapsing multiple times in the last year and millions periodically left without electricity. When the lights go off, it's not just some domestic discomfort that you are most likely accustomed to. Schools close, factories halt, refrigerated food spoils, and hospitals have to rely on aging generators that depend on the very fuel that is being cut off. Even international connectivity is affected. Airlines from Canada and Russia have paused Cuba-bound flights because there is not enough jet fuel on the island, illustrating how quickly an economic measure morphs into an apocalyptic scenario. And don't even get me started on the broader supply chain effect. If you cannot move goods efficiently around an island, everything from food distribution to construction and tourism gets choked to death. But Executive Order 14380 has not gone unchallenged internationally. UN special rapporteurs have called it a serious breach of international law, arguing that deliberately blocking fuel to the civilian population undermines their right to development and could qualify as a form of collective punishment. Human rights advocates and some lawmakers in the US and Europe have echoed that same criticism, warning that by cutting power to hospitals and essential services, Washington is assuming responsibility for everyone who dies. At the same time, a wave of grassroots solidarity has started to materialize. Progressive organizations across the Americas have come together to organize the Nuestra America Flotilla, a humanitarian convoy aimed at delivering fuel, food, and medical supplies to Cuba in defiance of the sanctions. Inspired in part by the flotillas to Gaza, the organizers are explicit that this is both a material intervention and a political act meant to...
I think there's another flotilla, by the way, going out to Gaza soon, if I remember correctly. So
expose what they see as the illegitimacy of the blockades. On a
By the way, those are the things that are going to go down in history as well. People are going to remember the flotillas. This whole period that we're living through is going to be one of the most historically significant in world history, I think, like modern world history. Like it'll be like the defining moments, I think, of the next century, if I had to guess. And I think, honestly, it all started from Gaza. That October 7th was like the moment, right? The moment that the epitome of imperial subjugation, an entirely colonized people of like living in a concentration camp ghetto that has been set up by an imperial outpost in the Middle East, broke their chains of oppression, jumped over the concentration camp walls, and violently like started attacking their colonizers, right? This like that moment will go down in history as, like, I think potentially one of the defining slave uprisings of the 21st century. And it was the moment that I think set off this entire series of events that we're living through to this day. Like international laws collapse, America's, aggression or like violent lashing out getting worse and worse as it gets into a weaker and weaker strategic position in the world, right? Like Trump 2, Kamala Harris's failure, the collapse of liberalism, the collapse of like pro-war liberalism, right? Like pro-Israel demographic collapse in the Democratic Party. Like all of these things are like going to have huge ramifications for the upcoming century. And so, yeah, I really think we're living through it right now. And yeah, anyway, what got me started off on that is like the Gaza flotillas, those are going to be a part of history. We're really living through it right now, man.
Political level, in response to the fuel squeeze, Havana has doubled down on its long-standing strategy of leaning on alternative partners, especially Russia and China, to shore up both the immediate energy deficit and the structural weakness of its grid. On the Russian side, energy cooperation has focused on modernizing Cuba's creaking power plants and adding new generation capacity. China, meanwhile, is moving to change the very basis of Cuba's energy mix. Beijing has quietly become Cuba's main economic lifeline in recent years, and one flagship project is a massive solar build-out. We're talking about 55 new solar parks planned by 2025, with another 37 by 2028, targeting roughly 2,000 megawatts of capacity. Several parks are already online, generating around 400 megawatts and covering roughly a third of the island's midday deficit, which frees up precious fuel for nighttime use when solar is offline.
Hell yeah, dude. Solar energy, it's going to become even more and more important as time goes on, especially if America has a complete and total like stranglehold on the on the fossil fuel industry. Solar power is going to become like so much more important. It's going to get built out so much quicker, and become like, hopefully it'll help actually save the fucking planet as well. But we'll see. I think that like obviously any moves towards solar is going to be good for the planet, but it is annoying that it's going to be because America is like basically destroying any place that can possibly produce oil. But yeah.
Chinese officials present this as a contribution to Cuba's right to development, while Cuban leaders see it as a way to claw back some sovereignty over their energy system in the face of the U.S. fuel choke. If those solar projects are completely on schedule, they will account for nearly two-thirds of the current demand, fundamentally reducing the leverage Washington can exert through oil sanctions alone.
2/3. If they can get 2/3 of their current energy grid on solar, then they are essentially still able to maintain their sovereignty. That would be great. Washington would lose a significant amount of their stranglehold on their economy at that point, because they're really prioritizing the oil as their main, you know, their main, the main way that they're trying to, you know, kill as many infants as they possibly can in Cuba.
And that, ladies, gentlemen, and NBs, is at the core of this story. Something the Americans see as a threat which must be answered. Because the story of Cuba makes even more sense if you put China back at the center of U.S. foreign policy. I guess the Cubans can never exit a Cold War, be it the first, second, third, or 55th one. So for Washington, Cuba is no longer just, I don't know, a small island gone rogue, 150 kilometers off Florida. It is a testing ground for how far, and Hakeem has mentioned this to an extent, a testing ground for how far China can push into what the U.S. still insists on calling its backyard, and how far countries under siege can break out of U.S. control using new financial and technological.
By the way, you see how America reacts when China even gets like economically involved in its quote unquote backyard? Do you see how that's going, like how that happens? I want you to imagine now, this is for all my liberals out there. For those who are like having a hard time understanding Russia's invasion of Ukraine and stuff, okay? Because I know that, like, you know, obviously it was an act of aggression, it was an act of imperialism. However, it wasn't unprovoked, because we have been putting like military bases, NATO memberships all over surrounding Russia's backyard, okay? And if any other country did that shit to us, we would be going to war with them immediately. We would be invading all of those countries that they are trying to set up in our backyard immediately if they started doing that. So I'm just trying to, you know, break people out of this, like the hypocrisy that we've built up in America, that like that we're just unable to see things from the same perspective that we see them here, like see them from another person's perspective as well.
Tools.
Just a side note.
For Beijing, Cuba was never just about buying sugar and selling consumer goods. They don't fucking need it. Havana signed onto the Belt and Road Initiative early, and over the last decade, the relationship has moved from trade into what the Pentagon calls critical infrastructure, 5G networks, modernized ports, and crucially, a huge build-out of renewable energy. In other words, China isn't just selling things to Cuba, it's helping to rewire, literally, how the island connects, trades, and empowers itself. That's where the solar parks I mentioned earlier come in. In the middle of a U.S.-driven fuel blockade, China has helped install close to 100 solar parks across the island and shipped thousands of home solar kits into Cuban neighborhoods. The idea is simple. If Washington is going to choke off tankers and diesel and so on, then Havana will try to leapfrog the choke point all together. Every rooftop can now run a fridge, a fan, and fuel lights without imported fuel is one less lever that the U.S. can pull. One less lever that unipolarity can utilize. So, from Washington's perspective, this is of course intolerable, and understandably so if, again, we put on our imperialist glasses. First, it breaks the unwritten rule of the Monroe Doctrine, you know, fucking cliche, no power is allowed to gain strategic depth in the Americas and so on. When U.S. officials and think tank analysts look at the Chinese-funded port upgrade in Cuba or a, fiber optic cable, they don't see development as is. They see dual-use infrastructure that could, in theory, from their perspective, serve as a resupply node for Chinese naval vessels or host surveillance and listening posts. The exact same container terminal that moves soybeans and medical supplies can, in their imagination, inherited from the Cold War, turn into a logistics hub for a, future PLA Navy presence in the Caribbean. Second, China's role in Cuba is not just physical, it's financial and systemic. The expansion of BRICS into BRICS Plus brings in big energy producers like Iran and Gulf states and creates a political space to talk seriously about alternatives to the dollar-centered payment system that we talk about all the time here on this show. For a country like Cuba, now you have a very direct example to combine something you might have learned from previous episodes, who is locked out of Western finance. This matters almost more than anyone else. As BRICS develops its own cross-border payment rails, the so-called BRICS Bridge, and as China pushes wider use of the yuan in trade, suddenly there is at least a theoretical exit ramp. Cuba can start invoicing some trade in RMB, exploring settlements through the BRICS-aligned mechanisms, and reducing its exposure to the dollar system that the U.S. Treasury has used as a weapon for decades. None of this is easy or cost-free, but the direction is clear. If enough global South economies can clear payments in non-dollar currencies, U.S. sanctions lose some of their strength.
Yep.
So,
and every time we use sanctions, every single time, including this one in Cuba, it brings that reality just a little bit closer. There's always a silver lining to every terrible thing we do.
Why this U.S. push right now? Well, part of it, in my opinion, honestly, is timing. China's rise has moved from a long-term concern to an immediate organized...
With, like, no help from us, right? It's so funny. Yeah, China, I think a lot of people thought China's rise was going to be like 30, 40 years from now or something. Like all the, liberal, like New York Times, like whenever they would write about the rise of China, it was always this like far-flung in the future thing. But Trump has just so quickly destroyed America, like at a rate that like even the people who recognized, like I would say that I kind of recognized America's decline. I would say after Trump won. Whenever Biden came into office, I was like, okay, America's on its way out. Like that I was still of the belief in Trump 1 that America was, could recover and become, the global superpower again. But then once Biden happened, I was like, okay, no, we're done. But Trump 2 has so thoroughly, I feel like, accelerated the American decline and China's rise that like it went from being like 30 to 40 years to like now everybody's like, oh God, it's happening already. Like in 5 years, China will be the hegemon and America will be some like middle power is kind of how it feels like everyone's thinking now. So I don't know. I think that that's a little bit funny. I think if you want to analyze it from like an actual like critical lens, I would say that the reason that America is collapsing so quickly is probably due to the sheer size of it. I think that like it's probably the largest global superpower that has ever existed, both in terms of, but primarily in terms of its military and force projection ability across the globe. And because it is so large and so vast, like the classic saying, the harder or the larger they are, the harder they fall, right? That we were so vast and so powerful that all of the normal mechanisms of imperial decline are happening at like a much faster and rapid rate. Like we like ballooned up so much bigger than other superpowers and overextended so much more than other superpowers that the like implosion of that is just way more rapid, it feels like, and more violent. That's kind of like what I would guess if I had to like try to analyze this from a critical like long-term perspective instead of just like the individual actions of like Trump as a madman or whatever, which those two things are interconnected, by the way. They're like results of each other kind of, but yeah.
In principle, yes, of U.S. strategy. If you think your main rival is trying to build out a global network of logistics and data nodes, you don't wait until there are Chinese Navy ships in Havana Harbor. You start drawing red lines with the first cranes show up.
I just want to comment one thing. Is the stupidity of, like, it really betrays the American mindset, because that's what they would do. They would use the pretext of economic development or investment or trade to like, militarily intervene and create bases and occupy, because that's what they fucking do. But the Chinese have never done this, right? But that's where that fucking, you know, that paranoia comes from.
Well, and there, I would say fundamentally, there's a reason behind that difference in ideology, and I think it's born from the birth of the countries or whatever, you know, like the nature of them, right? Because America was founded on a genocidal colonial project of white supremacy and of thinking our culture is better and more superior than this primitive one or whatever. Like, that's kind of just baked into the DNA of the American populace because of that, right? And we're full of contradictions and all that sort of stuff. But like that sort of violent imperialist domination of another people really just kind of, I'm trying to talk here. It's just very much different, I would say, than like how China as a country came to be, right? Where they have just a very long history. And yes, I'm sure there was violence, and I'm sure that there was, you know, land grabs and imperialist expansion to some extent or another. But in some regards, though, I think that that is so long in the past. Like, number one, that's like way further in the past than America's founding. And it wasn't so singular of an event and easily recognizable as like genocide or whatever as America's founding was. So like those sorts of two natures, I think you can kind of see a through line into how like violent and imperialist America is compared to how, like, you know, non-imperialist and like China is, kind of, is my initial thoughts, at least. I'm, you know, obviously when I'm out here talking, I'm speaking off the cuff, and I'm trying to also process my thoughts into, you know, voice at the same time. So sometimes I'm, you know, I'm still kind of processing and as I go when I'm talking sometimes, but that's my initial analysis on that, at least.
True. But even if the Cubans were opening up to even like the Chinese intelligence apparatus or even the Chinese military, they would be doing so because they have been sanctioned into oblivion with a country that, with, you know, its chest out, has said its intention is to destroy its sovereignty or even existence as such. So I agree completely with you, my friend. But even if they were collaborating with quote unquote America's enemies, number one, they're allowed to fucking do so. They're a sovereign state. I thought we all believe in that. And number two, they would be arming themselves both metaphorically and literally, both economically and militarily, against an enemy that has very openly stated that they don't want them to exist. So in both of these worlds, in my Marxian eyes or whatever, they have full legitimacy to proceed with doing what they have been forced by the Americans very openly to do. In an alternate universe where the Cubans were allowed to develop whatever fucking way they wanted to after their revolution, none of this would be part of the conversation. Neither would most of the things, I think you will agree, that the Cubans, you know, were forced into, again, would have happened. You know, these are what ifs or whatever, but wouldn't have happened if the Americans didn't immediately respond to the Cuban Revolution the way they did during the Cold War. But hey, this is a very stupid kind of what if, because I'm basically saying what if no Cold War, which is, you know, of course, Cold War has to happen because, you know,
what
systems
if no Cold
battling
War?
it out. That to the side.
That's a good, you know, I love good historical what ifs, though. What if no Cold War? What if Abraham Lincoln fought vampires? All those good things, you know.
Another thing to kind of pay attention to is that Cuba is also like symbolically very important. For the Yanquistanis, for the U.S. establishment, the island has always been a kind of ideological mirror. If socialism survives there, especially in America's own hemisphere, to them that undermines the myth that, you know, no country can resist a combination of U.S. pressure and global markets. I find this like driving force behind their constant barraging of Cuba to be completely naked, because you've already, like, the Cubans have already proven that. Almost a century of this is going to become of continuously attacking the Cubans through sanctions as a way to prove that socialism cannot survive close to the United States, has led to socialism surviving close to the United States. So what are you trying to disprove? Of course, I know what you're going to say. They're trying to disprove that a prosperous socialist society can exist by sabotaging it at every step. In this entire relation, all of these moves that are being made both by the Cubans and the Americans, energy keeps being so fucking central. Control over fuel has always been one of Washington's primary levers on Cuba. By escalating energy sanctions, right now, the U.S. is trying to do two things at once: sabotage the renewable transition that would make Cuba less vulnerable, that the Chinese and to a lesser extent the Russians are helping with, and signal to every other government flirting with Chinese-backed projects that there is always going to be a price to pay. And if a small island can, with Chinese help, push through a renewable energy revolution under bombardment, it proves in real time that the old model, dependence on U.S.-controlled oil companies, banks, and shipping, is not the only game in town anymore. And that's really the heart of the clash. U.S. foreign policy is being recentered around containing China. But that's where my favorite contradiction of imperialism comes in. That pretty much Hakeem has hammered into my head through these many years of friendship. The more Washington squeezes with, in this case, energy sanctions, financial blacklists, and security rhetoric, the more incentive Cuba has to lean into precisely the alternatives the U.S. is trying to stop. BRICS finance, yuan-denominated trade, Chinese tech, and developing world solidarity. There's no winning for these motherfuckers long term. There just isn't. But that leads us into a more general theoretical conversation. Here we need to talk about the questions of primary and secondary contradictions. Here we get to the question, as I said, of contradictions, specifically here, primary and secondary contradictions. The primary contradiction is the one that exerts the most decisive influence on the development of a society at a given historical moment. The struggle between U.S. imperialism and Cuban national sovereignty and socialism. You cannot solve internal problems like inefficiency or bureaucracy if the state is being physically strangled from the outside. Secondary contradictions: state versus private sector. The tension between the socialist state and the growing small private businesses. Productive forces versus relations of production. Cuba has highly developed human capital, like scientists and doctors, but lacks the productive forces, machinery, fuel, energy in general, due to the blockade. Anti-imperialism is not just about liking Cuba. It is an objective necessity for the global proletariat. So, now the question becomes, how do, or at least how should Marxists actually analyze Cuba today? Because the common discussions tend to collapse into either uncritical praise or liberal criticism that ignores material conditions. Both are doofus behavior, and neither is particularly useful.
Doofus is a great word. I need to use that word more often, I think.
A more grounded way to approach this is through the concept of contradictions. The primary contradiction, the one that most decisively shapes everything else is U.S. imperialism versus Cuban sovereignty. Everything else sprouts from that core contradiction. You cannot meaningfully analyze economic inefficiency, bureaucracy, market reforms, all the valid things that libs and even some communists latch onto without accounting for the fact that Cuba has been under continuous economic siege for over 60 years. When a country is being actively strangled financially, commercially, technologically, its internal contradictions don't disappear. They simply become secondary. That, though, does not mean that Cuba has no internal tensions. It obviously does, just like anywhere else. Let's take a couple of examples. First, there's the state versus the private sector. Cuba has increasingly allowed small private businesses to operate inside of the country. This creates new layers of inequality and tension between planning and market activity. But again, these developments aren't happening in a vacuum. They're responses to external pressure. China has done something similar, and while communists love to squabble about China's socialism, it's worth noting that China still exists. Maybe it's better to bend under supervision than break under some misguided notion of ideological purity. Let's look at another contradiction. The productive forces versus the relations of production. Cuba has both a highly educated population and strong healthcare and scientific sectors, but lacks machinery, fuel, and access to global supply chains. This is a classic contradiction. The human capacity exists, but the material base is constrained, largely due to the blockade. So, from a Marxist standpoint, anti-imperialism here isn't about aesthetics or moral preference. This isn't a game to the Cuban people, and we shouldn't treat it that way either. Their anti-imperialism is structural. If a small country attempting socialism is blockaded, sabotaged, and isolated, then weakening that pressure is a prerequisite for any internal development. In other words, you cannot resolve Cuba's internal contradictions while the primary contradiction, imperialist pressure, remains dominant. So where does that leave us? What does the future look like? There are a few possible trajectories. Over the next decade, Cuba is likely to move along three overlapping tracks: a Vietnam-China style reform path on its own terms, a special period, we fucking remember that, 2.0 of disciplined rationing and mobilization, and a deeper integration into a multipolar bloc that lets it trade and develop outside of the U.S. financial chokehold. The first track is the most misunderstood. Cuba is not about to copy-paste Vietnam or China, but it is clearly looking at that playbook. In both cases, one-party socialist states opened up tightly controlled spaces for private and foreign capital, especially in export-oriented sectors, while keeping political and strategic industries under state control. The point wasn't to transition to capitalism, but to harness market tools to rebuild after sanctions or entire cold-ass fucking wars. Cuba is already moving in that direction, expanding legally recognized private businesses, experimenting with foreign invested zones, and inviting partners to build infrastructure and joint ventures while trying to keep the commanding heights, energy, health, biotech, ports, telecoms, in public hands. At the same time, the island is effectively in a special period 2.0, the 1990s logic of total rationing and wartime mobilization is so fucking back, but this time under a fuel blockade and financial siege instead of the collapse of the USSR. That means rationing and planning are going to get a lot sharper, not looser. The state will kind of prioritize electricity for hospitals, key industries, and transport, and normalize, if they already haven't for the last couple of decades, but now by pushing it into sixth gear, that consumers have to live with tighter limits while the energy transition beds in. Furthermore, you'll see a kind of war economy mentality. Campaigns to save energy, reorganize transport, shift production to less fuel-intensive methods, and localize as much food as possible to cut import dependence. And finally, the special period 2 is likely to be politically framed not as passive suffering, but as a kind of national resistance phase on the way to a more sovereign economy, a narrative that gives the government room to ask for sacrifices now in exchange.
It'll probably. I mean, I think that that would be a good narrative. I think that that would probably succeed. I mean, it is true. Like they are resisting colonial oppression, and I like. I'm sure there are plenty of Cubans out there who have been, brainwashed by propaganda as well. Like I'm not denying that there are people out there who do like who don't believe that this is due to the American blockade, or like they still think it's primarily because of like the structure of their government. But I do think that as the siege tightens and as people's lives get even worse because of that. Oh, what's that? Oh, I'm almost done. Can it wait like 20 minutes? Okay. Sorry, that's my wife. She wants to go get some coffee. So, yeah, but I'm gonna let this play again. And then we'll keep on going.
For a secure future. The third track is where the really big structural shift sits. Integration into a multipolar bloc, which could give Cuba a way to treat the US-centered system as optional rather than unavoidable. As BRICS expands and solidifies, and as more global South economies coordinate their energy, finance, and tech policies, Cuba gains leverage. If Havana can clear trade with Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Iran, and others via BRICS-linked platforms or bilateral agreements, it can sell what it's strong in: sugar, medical services, biotech, tourism, in exchange for oil, wheat, machinery, and inputs without routing a single dollar through Yankistan. That doesn't magically fix, of course, every fucking problem, but it rewrites the basic script. The U.S. state sponsor of terrorism label that hopefully every listener knows that they strapped on them as an excuse for sanctions and so on. And secondary sanctions lose part of their bite when your deals never touch the USD. So the future is likely not one neat model, but kind of a hybrid. A Cuban path that mixes selective reforms inspired from the East, a hard-edged special period mentality, and a strategic bet on the multipolar bloc. If that bet pays off, if Cuba manages under siege to stabilize its energy system with
at the rate America's going right now, I think that's a pretty good bet. I think that's a good bet.
Keep its social core intact and turn BRICS and Chinese partnership into real economic breathing space, then the message to the rest of the global South can truly be explosive. The one nightmare the Americans were trying to contain, arguably ending up being its loudest, what do the Yanks say? Megaphone? Speakerphone? Yeah. The thing you yell in. Right. The thing you yell in. The thing you yell in.
Look, with such a beautiful delivery, I can only support you with one statement, Habib, and is this. I went and I checked the UN General Assembly votes on the U.S. Economic sanctions against Cuba, the votes.
Yes, sir.
Back from when it was first being voted on from 1992 until today. I am, with a heavy heart, delivering the information that Albania has in fact voted for, or again, like no to ending the economic sanctions only one time, and it was in 1993.
God bless. No, I love. Dude, I am Albanian. You are Albanian. We are all Albanian.
We are all Albania.
Therefore, Albania but you know what? I'm not comes out of a place of love. You know. Yeah.
I'm not from Palau or Marshall Islands, which are two like microstates that always just vote the way the U.S. wants, because that's the third vote that you always see. It's Palau and a bunch of other.
Yeah, it's always send me 100K and I'll vote this way. Unironically, there's like exactly 12 dudes on a ship. Yeah.
Exactly. All right, let me give you some quick book recommendations. We should have done this for the Iran thing and for China. I think we did for China, not for Iran. Anyways, for Cuba, there's a couple of books that I want to recommend. The first and foremost, and the most important one, is The Economic War Against Cuba, A Historical and Legal Perspective on the U.S. Blockade by Salim Nourani, and it's published by Monthly Review. fantastic work. It's very short. The actual meat of it is like 80 pages. So do go pick it up. Buy it from Monthly Review if you can, so you can support that fantastic publishing house. Do not buy from Verso. Those are cucks and cowards. They do not deserve your business. They don't publish it, by the way. They don't publish any. I read the other day, I stumbled into a store that for whatever reason had a Verso book published on Palestine, and I was like, it's like a red bookstore and whatnot. So I'm just gonna fucking pick up this. I didn't want it, but I got it just to support them, right? And I fucking regret it. You know what? I'll tell you exactly which one it is, so you can stay away from it. It's in my bag. Is my bag here? Yeah, there's my bag. Hold on. Let me get this fucking garbage.
He is on a what's called on a roll, not a roll. He's on a
rant.
On a rant.
There it is.
Not a single list, which is, by the way, this is kind of low-key huge because like we have like unironically over 100,000 fucking regular listeners that are like the core of who right. yeah but that are the core. I'm saying a part of them that are the core of people that would buy from Verso. So like you're hitting him in their prime. Oh my god.
If yes hit him where it hurts. Fuck Verso. I hate Verso. Okay, the book is The Destruction of Palestine is the Destruction of the Earth. I had the displeasure of purchasing
this whole company.
Okay, I'm gonna scoot ahead just a little bit, people.
Fucking garbage, right? I don't think we possess anything like a comprehensive, up-to-date deficit of Al-Quran and Islamic motifs. Fantastic overview of how to have an enduring socialism in the most difficult. Anyways, the books I was trying to recommend to you is...
Sorry, I wanted to skip past that. I'm trying to speed it up so that I can go get coffee with my wife.
The Economic War Against Cuba by Lamrani, by Monthly Review. The second one is How the Workers' Parliament Saved the Cuban Revolution, Reviving Socialism After the Collapse of the Soviet Union by Pedro Ross. This book I cannot recommend enough. It is a fantastic overview of how to have an enduring socialism in the most difficult of circumstances. And finally, it's the classic by Arnold August titled Cuba and Its Neighbors, Democracy in Motion, which basically goes over how Cuban democracy works and shows how actually fantastic it is and how you need to step out of the paradigm of the the two-party system that the Americans have. It's very good as a like a baby leftist kind of anybody who's like you want to introduce them to socialism.
Look, I think that I'm pretty okay with like modern politics and like understanding the current political moment that we're living in, but my history and my theory is not that great. That's kind of why I'm doing a lot of these educational streams, so that I can also learn and grow with all of my fellow Claytriots out there.
They're kind of like positive to Cuba for whatever reason, usually racism, but whatever, they're kind of positive to Cuba compared to the DPRK or something else. So you hand them this book and then I can start them down the trajectory of critical thinking. Those are the books I recommend. There's many more, but we're out of time. Out of time, as what's his name says. God, Kiss FM.
Time guy. I am the time guy.
No, it's the weekend.
Oh God, yes, yeah. Geez.
Kiss FM when it came out like years ago, but I still listen to a lot of his stuff.
There you go. New Lord drop. He's a fucking The Weeknd fan, and you know,
I
never meet your heroes. Yeah, don't meet your heroes because
do you know how much of a Weeknd fan I am? I used to listen to him when he had the what's it called? I'm going to be full hipster on this. The original trilogy releases, when they were still coming out, I used to listen to them back then.
You see how horny this man is? You see how horny?
Okay, guys, I'm going to call it there. I got to go get coffee with my wife. I think that's a pretty interesting one. I got a little bit of information out of that, particularly some of the timelines of the various events the various legislation that was passed against Cuba with our, like I said, autistic fixation on eviscerating the Cuban people. So anyway, I guess I'm going to call it. Thank you all for watching the stream. If you're watching the VOD, love you too. Yeah, this has been Technically Clay, and the stream is technically over. Bye-bye.